We're live.
We're live, yeah.
With Andy Blow from Precision Hydration, as seen in the background.
Hello, guys. You right?
Yeah, very good.
Good,
Yourself.
thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us. So we're going to ask Andy a few questions all about hydration, clearly.
Yeah.
But Andy, first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe about precision.
Yeah. Precision hydration.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, easy for you to say. Yeah, cool. Thank you thanks for the invite to have a chat first of all. But Precision Hydration is one of those little businesses that came out of a personal struggle, and the struggle that I had was, as a triathlete, I would have all sorts of problems when the weather got hot. Basically, very, very long story short, because of my sweating. So I would basically do pretty well in cold conditions or normal kind of UK conditions.
Yep.
I'd go to Hawaii to do the Ironman, or I raced out in Asia and in Australia, places like that. I would just fall on my backside when it was hot, especially hot and humid. And I always knew that I had a very high sweat rate, so I always thought that had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But it took me years and years to learn about this interesting feature of sweat, about the fact that different people lose different amounts of electrolytes in their sweat. And I basically, not only do I sweat a lot, but I lose loads of salt in my sweat. So those two factors combined made it really difficult for me to compete at a high level in hot and humid conditions until I sort of learned the workarounds. And that was how Precision Hydration, the company, was born, because at the time, this is probably going back 15, 20 years ago now, early 2000s, I was looking around on the internet, I was talking to people, and there just wasn't a good resource of information where you could go and learn about this sort of thing. And so that's the gap that we sort of stepped in to try and fill.
So two things. First, well, you probably
I think
caught
I know where it's
you
going.
dropped it in really subtly, but we're just going to kind of rewind you back to that. So talk to me about Kona.
Kona, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I am, as any young triathlete, I'll give you my backstory very quickly as a triathlete. I went to the University of Bath in the late 1990s, which was a triathlon centre of excellence, and I was surrounded by all of the fantastic athletes that were trying to go to the Olympic Games in Sydney in 2000. So people like Simon Lessing and that sort of era, and the top dogs in the world. And I had my sights set on, seeing if I could be good enough to go to maybe 2004 Athens Olympics. And although I was pretty decent, I wasn't really of that level, I wasn't really of that caliber. So I ended up getting frustrated and going towards Xterra and towards Ironman. And I'd always watched, I'd been involved in triathlon since the mid-90s, and always watched all the old VHS videotapes of Dave Scott and Mark Allen in Kona, and genuinely sort of dreamed of one day I'm going to run down the Leahy Drive and do the big Ironman finish and everything. And so that became a bit of the next target was, okay, well, I'd love to do Ironman and go to Kona. I spent a couple of years training up and failed at my first attempt to qualify, but then subsequently qualified at my next attempt to go to Kona. That was in 2003, and I got a slot for 2004. And I was in very good shape at the time. In 2003, when I qualified, I came third overall at 70.3 in the UK, where you could get an Ironman slot at the time. I was beating professional athletes. I was beating guys who'd got top 20 in Kona, and I didn't have any illusions of grandeur. I didn't think I was going to go there and smash it, but I thought top 50, top 100, I was going to go and have a solid race. And I had a shocker. I was like 250th or something, and it was awful, absolutely awful. And a lot of that was down to just not appreciating what the conditions would do to my body.
Yeah, because you see it a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
When you watch the guys and girls on the bikes, you see just the sweat, just the white stains just starting to appear on the triceps as they're working late.
Well, that was one of the big things that alerted me to the fact that I was losing so much salt. It was a friend of mine who was a doctor, who I told him the symptoms I was getting, and he looked at photos and saw me at races, and he saw all this white salt all over my face and all over my hat, and he was like, "You're losing a lot of salt. We need to get that. We need to assess that."
Yeah.
And when we look back at the amount of salt that I was taking in for a race like Kona, it was like a drop in the ocean of what I actually needed. Yeah. Even though it was probably okay for other people, because I was kind of copying other people's strategies at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Definitely.
Because that's one of those things. I know that I came and spoke to, I can't even remember who I spoke to. It might have even been yourself, but for my first triathlon, as the London Troy show, and you kind of walk around and everyone's trying to say, oh, look, come on, get hold of this. And actually the salt tabs and the 1000s, you know, that's what I kind of swear by with training. And we kind of passed it on, and it amazes me the amount of events that we've done. And I've always got a blister pack of salt tablets just in case. And the amount of times that I'll see someone really struggling and be like, you know what, looks like you need a salt. There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Really,
well, triathletes generally, if you're sort of slowing down, people think of two things. That they think you might be getting dehydrated, or you might be getting low on sugar and calories and stuff. And those two things can definitely happen, but it can also be that salt that you need, or that sodium that you need, and that's especially true if that's happening to you like deep into a long and hot event, and you've not been consciously taking a lot of that in. Because I think a lot of people think electrolytes are something that they're like a little bit of fairy dust. You just need to sprinkle a little bit in, and it's like magic. That's what you need. And they don't realize that the dose is very important. The same as the dose of carbohydrates is important. The same as the amount of fluid that you drink is important. And the other thing that confounds everyone is that in the shorter distances, if you're just kind of doing stuff in cold conditions or whatever, you can kind of get away with a pretty slapdash approach to that, because your losses aren't so great. So the penalties for getting it wrong just aren't so severe.
Yeah, definitely. And that's obviously why the sweat test on the website is so important, just to kind of work out what sort of level you're at.
Well, that's what we try and do with athletes now. Is we try and split people into different categories. Like there's types of people with a certain physiology, so people who don't sweat a lot, people who don't lose a lot of salt, and also people who do certain types of events. So if you're just doing short course stuff, generally racing in cooler conditions and don't have a huge training load, kind of electrolyte replacement, and that is relatively small fry for you. It might even be it might not even be a thing, you know, because you replace largely what you lose in your food. And most of us get a decent amount of sodium in our diet. If we're not sweating profusely and regularly and for a long period of time, we don't necessarily need to worry too much about that salt loss element particularly. Right. Then you kind of move into the mid-range of people, which is more like I think where a lot of age group athletes sit. And it's like you're training quite a lot. You may be doing some longer sessions. You might be going to compete abroad if you're a UK athlete, into hotter conditions. And if you're someone there who loses a lot of sweat or a lot of salt, this element starts to get a bit interesting for you, and you need a bit of education, you need a bit of understanding of your body, and you might need stronger products to give you sodium back at a rate that's a lot stronger than your average sports drink. And then right at the top end, you've got the sort of freaks like me who are sweating loads, and back in the day when I was doing loads and loads of training, and then trying to go and compete in hot conditions. And we need to be very, very precise, very specific with what we're replacing. And what like the free online sweat test on our website, or if you can do a sweat test with us, where we take a sample of sweat and measure you, all of that is designed not to tell you exactly what you need, because no one can do that, but it's to get you in that zone. Are you kind of one of these low, medium or high people in terms of what you need? And then we can help with strategies around getting it right.
Yeah,
it's good. You need to open up in Norwich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads on to our first question. I mean, we got quite a few questions from people. You know, a lot of it is based on, you know, how do I use these products? And, you know, what's the best way? So we'll go through those first. And
then... So this is from one of our members who I think they're taking one of the 500 tab a day. So when they're using the tablets on the exercise days and non-exercise days, are they better to have it at the start of the day, at the end of the day, or kind of keep sipping it as the day goes on?
Okay.
Yeah, good question. I would say a little bit. It depends on a few things. It's not, and also to an extent, it's not super critical as well. You know, if you drink that throughout the day or have it all in one go or whatever, it's not going to be a game changer one way or the other. But what I would say is a few things to think about is turning up to your key training session of the day, if you're doing, especially if you're doing more than one training session in the day, but turning up to your training session well hydrated is probably one of your biggest priorities, because then you get more out of the session, you fatigue less, you feel less lousy afterwards, all that kind of stuff. So I would say if you're just sort of having one of these a day, maybe having it in the hour before you exercise, whatever time of day that is probably the best plan, because that is then going to optimize your hydration or help you to be as well hydrated as you need to be for that's probably especially true if either you're training first thing in the morning and you've trained like late the day before, so you might be a little bit underhydrated, or if you're training after a long day at work when you've been running around, you've been drinking tea and coffee, you've not been as on top of things as you can, sort of having the presence of mind to think an hour before I'm going to have an electrolyte drink might be the better choice than kind of balance, because most of us think about that stuff like 5 minutes before you start your session, or you start trying to drink during the session when it's already a bit too late. So I'd say in the pre-exercise window is probably your best bet.
It's interesting because we both well, particularly on the watt bike, we both stick 1,000 in the bottle and off we go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice. And then so that's the train days. What about non-training days? Do you think it's just like you say, it doesn't really matter, just get it in?
I think so, based on how thirsty you feel. One thing, if athletes are interested, because often people come to us because they're concerned, they don't know whether they're hydrated or dehydrated. And one really good thing I think athletes can do from time to time, and you shouldn't do this like all the time, but to get a trend on it, is take your morning body weight the first thing. So get up, go for a pee, and then weigh yourself. And also look at your pee when you go to the toilet. Is it dark or is it normal? Just the first time you pee in the morning. And if it's a bit dark, and if your body weight's dropped significantly from the day before, those two things together are a really powerful sign that you might be a bit underhydrated. And if you do that, you have to do that a number of times, because you have to know where your baseline is. But if you do that, you start to build up a picture and a trend as to whether you're habitually kind of rehydrating every 24 hours quite well, or whether you're seeing some peaks and troughs, in which case you might want to try and flatten that out a little bit. Which can be really, that can be good, because people often say, oh, look at your pee to see if you're dehydrated, but that on its own, not a great measure, because if I have a coffee and then go to the toilet, it will be pretty clear, because coffee's a diuretic, but it doesn't mean it's really hydrating me very well.
Of course. And also you could be carrying that through, couldn't you? It might not be what you've lost in your sleep. You might have been dehydrated from the day before and just be carrying it through. So
Definitely
good advice. See, these are great, all these little bits of information you see. Go on. I can see you're keen.
So someone who, when they race, they have a 1,500 tablet post race. But their question is, should they drink a little bit of that before the race and then the rest after, or should they wait until after the race to rehydrate?
I think it's probably a case of a bit of both, actually. And the pH 1500 is the strongest drink that we do, and it's got 1,500 milligrams of sodium in every litre. But one serving, just to confuse you, is half a litre. So what we'd normally say is, so that's got 750 milligrams of sodium total in it. But that's about 3 times stronger. If you took like an off-the-shelf drink, like a Lucozade or something like that, or a High Five, that's going to have 500 milligrams a litre, or 250 milligrams per bottle serving. So it's about 3 times as strong. And the reason we recommend having that pre and post race is that pre-race, the additional sodium goes into your bloodstream, pulls fluid with it, helps you to be a little bit more well hydrated in terms of blood volume before the start. And then if you do the same again afterwards, because you'll probably get dehydrated during the event, it's an easier way to rehydrate more quickly. Because if you just drink lots and lots of water, whilst you think you might be hydrating, you are, but you're doing it quite slowly, because you end up inevitably weeing quite a lot of that out.
Definitely. Yeah, and so what would you do during? So you've got like, kind of drink it before, drink it afterwards. do you use stuff during?
Depends on the length of the event, predominantly length, intensity, and the heat. So I would probably very crudely split it into like 3 categories, where I'd say anything like really short stuff to 2 hours, you're gonna just drink what you feel like drinking. So drink to thirst, as they call it. You just basically make sure you've got drinks available, but I wouldn't have too much of a preconceived idea about how much you got to get in. It's a case of listen to it. If you start really well hydrated, in an hour or 2, you can't significantly dehydrate really, unless you're in Miami in the summer, and it's like 100 degrees and 95% humidity. Then you might have to be a bit more structured. But for most of us, like a couple of hours, drink what you like, and you'll be okay. You go in this sort of like 2 to 4 hour bracket, and I would say some people can just drink what they feel like, and if it's weather's cooler, that's probably true. But you're starting to get in the zone where you might need to have a bit of a plan for roughly how much you're going to drink. And I would say, again, very broadly and crudely, that's going to be somewhere in the region of maybe like half a litre to 3/4 of a litre an hour, something like that. And then you play around with that and you test and adjust. And it's going to be different bike or run or whatever, because you can drink more on the bike more easily than you can running. But that kind of zone is average, if you like. Then when you get to like 4 hours to whatever, ultra stuff, then it's way more variable, because it's got all to do with your sweat rate, the length of the event, and you might be at the high end. We might see people drinking a litre an hour in that kind of time span, because they're working really hard. They're fit athletes in hot and humid conditions, smashing away. I work with Ironman athletes who are drinking a litre an hour on the bike in the heat. But I've got to emphasize, that's the upper end. That's not like a target, and that's not something to aspire to. That's just because that's what their body needs. Other athletes will get away with 300 or 400 milliliters an hour. But what you tend to find with the really long events is that you've got to have a plan that you then are going to try to stick to, especially early on, a bit like a pacing plan. You stick to your pacing plan early on, you stick to your hydration plan early on, and then you see how you feel, and you're constantly evaluating it. And the deeper into the event you go, the more you go by feel, because we pretty much all know how we're going to feel, hopefully after the swim and in the first hour of the bike, even in a long event. But predicting how you're going to feel 5 hours in is way more difficult. And that's when you've got to have a bit of flexibility. But what we always encourage athletes to know is what we call the sort of guardrails are for them. So for me, it's like, if I'm drinking less than half a litre an hour, I'm probably cutting it on the too light side. But if I'm above a litre an hour, I'm pushing it in terms of what I can absorb and take in. So that's kind of my window. And I'm going to then play around in that window.
Interesting.
And with the kind of electrolyte stuff as well, do you mix and match it a little bit during events? I mean, obviously not the shorter ones, but certainly the longer stuff, the 70.3s and the Ironmans.
I would say for me, it's quite an obvious choice. I tend to use the strongest stuff because of my high sweat rate, because of my high sodium loss. I'm sort of already at that far end. For other people, I would say, the 1,000 milligram product that we make is probably the most popular one for people to use in racing, if they're not super salty, but they're not also losing only a little bit. That's the sweet spot in the middle. That's the kind of, that's the catch-all one, really. And that's about twice the strength of a regular electrolyte drink. Because I think, like I said before, a lot of people think just because they're taking some electrolytes, that'll do the job. And actually, most commercial products are a little bit on the skimpy side for hardcore endurance athletes. They're probably fine if you're playing 90 minutes of football or something like that, but they're not going to see you through 5 hours in the Alps on a bike or whatever.
Interesting. I feel like I'm doing something right in a triathlon though, because the thousands is what I stick to.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it works though. It definitely works.
And I think the thing is, if you've got that part dialed, if you've got the sort of fluid and sodium part dialed, there's only one other component you've got to worry about then, and that's how many grams of carbohydrate you're taking in per hour.
Yeah.
And and honestly, if you get those 3 things right, you're like 95% of the way there to having a great race.
Definitely.
Because athletes get confused by all the noise in sports nutrition. But I always say, volume of fluid, you've got to get that roughly right. The amount of sodium, if you need it, that you've got to get that roughly right. Grams of carbs per hour, if you get that about right, there's only one other job you've got to do, which is then pace it right.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is in the noise.
It's just so simple. You make it sound so easy.
No, but I think it's a valid point. People get so caught up with kind of everything that's out there, don't they? It's easy to kind of get.
It is, and it is confusing if you don't understand a little bit about physiology and nutrition and biochemistry. You don't need a high level in this, but people do get confused because we get messages about slow release carbohydrates and all these gels and drinks now that are all, gel based and slow release, all this kind of stuff. None of those things are kind of maybe they've got some good science behind them to a degree, but they're the tiny points that are less important than the big picture things, which are just getting roughly the right amount of the key nutrients in. And then we worry about whether it's a Morton gel or a goo gel later, if at all, if that's relevant.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, we were chatting to Pete Jacobs. I just drop it, Ironman World Champion. And he's a complete opposite end of the scale. So he's fat adapted.
Yeah.
Doesn't really eat that much during the race. Again, more for him, it's getting the electrolytes, getting the fluids right. Keep, so whatever fuel base you're using, whether it's carbs or fat, the constant seems to, electrolytes, hydration, get that right and you're good. And caffeine. Lots of caffeine.
Definitely, yeah. If your body responds well to it, it's a bit of a good thing.
I don't. Race day caffeine is not good for me till the end. When I'm nearly home, it's fine, but before then, wreck.
Doesn't happen, does it?
No, too wired, man. Right, number 3.
So have you got? This isn't for me, by the way, although I do like a gin. Have you got any recommendations how to stay hydrated when you don't like water on its own, but you enjoy sort of teas, coffee, and ice in your gin?
Sorry, it's my iPad singing. Let me turn it off and then you can ask it again because that's rude.
Interrupting.
Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry.
It's just so annoying.
Should be that one.
Look at this, live on air. Technology.
What is it? Don't work with children.
And almost middle-aged men with iPads.
Got it.
No, it wasn't. Come on. Why the hell is it not switching on? I just put it. Oh, okay. Oh, it's because you need to.
There we go.
All right.
Needs a woman's touch.
Touch.
Yeah.
Right. Try that one again. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
That's all right.
So have you got any recommendations on how to stay hydrated when you don't like water on its own, but you enjoy drinking sort of teas and coffee throughout the day and then ice in your gin?
Yeah, I mean, ice in gin is a great way to stay hydrated, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And if you get your electrolyte drink mixed up and freeze it ahead of time, and then drop that in, then that's awesome. Slow release electrolytes into your gin.
Stick a 1,000 milligram into your gin with ice.
Yeah, sorted.
You're away. Yeah. Well, we do have this dirty secret that the 1500s are pretty good for hangover cure and prevention.
You've done that. I think you've done that before. I'm sure you did a few years ago.
Yeah.
You felt rough and were like, I'm going to have a precision. Because it was before you were driving home, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like, have fun home.
Really
amazing.
great,
Yeah, we've heard a few stories about that use. But I think if you're someone so there's this kind of misconception, I think, in a lot of people, that if you don't like drinking tons of water, you'll be forever dehydrated. And I think a lot of people, don't. Some people do walk around dehydrated some of the time, and probably to their detriment, but I don't think it's most people, and I don't necessarily think it's most of the time. I think thirst is a really powerful drive, and if you get really thirsty, that's a sign that you're getting really dehydrated, and most people will act on that and rehydrate. I think if you're not mad keen on just drinking plain water, then juice, cordial, that sort of stuff, not like loads of soft drinks or things with tons of sugar in are probably, for other reasons, are probably better to avoid.
Yeah.
But you can get in the summer especially. I find that at the moment I'm working in this, like, looks like I'm in a sauna or something. It's actually a shed at the bottom of my garden, and with lockdown we've been working here quite a lot, and in the day the sun's beating in, and I find after a couple of bottles of water I fancy something a bit different, like, so I'll take some of the kids squash and drink that, or I will just we do a 250 electrolyte tablet, which is very low. And although functionally that's not a huge amount of electrolyte replacement, it's got a bit of flavour to it, it's got a little bit of the salts there, and sometimes that will taste really good. So sometimes the low calorie, electrolyte tablets are a good thing once in a while as well. But honestly, I think unless people are actually dehydrated, a lot of the time they just kind of feel bad if they're not drinking loads of water, and that's just probably more of a psychological thing than actually being horrendously dehydrated.
Yeah, because I think it's kind of drummed in, isn't it? Isn't it meant to be like 2 litres a day you're meant to drink?
Yeah.
Extra.
The interesting thing about all those guidelines is that there's not a lot of science behind them. It's because it's totally dependent on your individual fluid loss and fluid turnover. And if you eat a good diet, if you eat lots of fruit, vegetables, salads, that kind of stuff, you get a tremendous amount of water actually from your diet as well.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't stress about it. But one thing I do say to people sometimes who can think they might be a bit dehydrated is say, look, it's not, even unless you absolutely hate it, it's not too much of a hardship to get some really nice cold water, put a bottle of water in the fridge and add a bottle of water into your day, and see how that makes you feel. Because if that makes you feel better, then most people can achieve that. And that's because that's a significant step in the right direction.
Yeah,
definitely. Nice. See, you're full of good tips. Full of them. Right. Oh, that was quite a good one.
So the last question we've got was, why is it important to drink electrolytes rather than just water if you train and race triathlon?
Yeah, so I think this one is all about one of the things we talked about early on, which is like the volume of sweating that you do. Because normally what happens in the body is you're built to sort of do an amount of physical activity, sweat a bit to keep your body temperature down. And then when you subsequently drink water and eat food with sodium in there, it all gets replaced and everything goes back to normal, and homeostasis and balance is restored. When you're training a lot though, you can potentially sweat out and lose an amount of electrolyte, especially that is not replaceable in a normal diet. And that means this is for people who are probably training every single day or close to it and doing significantly long sessions or even 2 sessions in a day, especially at the moment, people are training indoors, doing a lot of long turbo sessions or Zwift sessions or watt bike sessions, doing treadmill running, all that kind of stuff where you really do lose a lot of sweat. If you're not replacing some of those electrolytes in the drinks that you're having around training, then you are probably getting a bit more towards the side of risking depletion. And there's a really good paper that I can probably share with you guys, which was written a few years ago, called The Importance of Salt in the Athlete's Diet, because the main electrolyte you lose is sodium, which is what you find in sodium chloride in standard table salt. And salt has been sort of like really demonized by the nutrition world a lot over the last few decades as being, a big component of high blood pressure and heart disease. And the jury, I think, is still out as to whether that is the case or not. And it probably is the case that the majority of the population eat more salt than they need. But actually athletes are probably one of the groups that's most at risk of being deficient in salt. Because I certainly have problems if I'm training really hard, or if I'm in a hot country and I don't consume sufficient salt, it doesn't take long for me to feel really lousy. And actually my performance to go, I start to get cramps. I can get cramps at night. It's pretty horrid. And a lot of people, it's all about the required dose for what you're losing. So I wouldn't say blanket that all triathletes, for instance, need to replace electrolytes, because those who are doing short stuff, who are training very lightly and infrequently, that probably don't. But at the other extreme, anyone who's putting in a significant amount of training hours should at least be looking at it and considering whether their physiology and their training regime warrants using it. And that fundamentally, going full circle is why we exist, because we're there to try to advise people. Okay, well, do you need it at all? And if you need it, do you need a low, medium, or high dose? Because your body tends to respond best to getting the most accurate dose of what you're taking in.
But like I say, otherwise you're just taking it in and probably just getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And is there on that? Is there any risk of overdosing on electrolytes? Come on.
Yeah, I think there's always an overdose or a risk of overdoing things with athletes, especially because when athletes get told that taking something will help them get faster, they'll probably take 5, and there'll always be 1 or 2 who will take 10. So the difficulty with overdosing with pure electrolytes is that if you mix them into a drink, to make them strong enough to make you actually physically ill, you would have to mix them up so ridiculously strong that they would probably make you sick before you could make yourself ill. But to give you an example on someone who has made themselves really ill with an electrolyte overdose, there's a guy in America that's documented in a paper that I read, who drank a quart, which I can't remember how much a quart is, but it's quite a decent volume of pure soy sauce for a bet. And soy sauce is like 100 times stronger than our strongest electrolyte drink. And it nearly killed him because the salt levels in his blood rose so fast that what happens is your body pulls fluid from the intracellular space into the bloodstream, into the extracellular space. And you end up with, your cells shrink and shrivel up, and you get nerve damage and all sorts of stuff. And it's horrid. And he nearly died. They put him in a medically induced coma, and flushed his system and managed to save him. But it's like anything. An overdose of pretty much anything can do you a mischief. But with electrolytes, you have to go a long, long way beyond what's reasonable in order to hurt yourself. That stuff is like, on a scale of what you'd need to take in, you've got sports drinks, even the strongest sports drinks, then you've kind of got seawater, and then you've got what he did. And we all know that if you even try and drink a cup full of seawater, which will make you pretty sick. So your body has these kind of ways of telling you. I wouldn't ever say though that you can't overdose, and I wouldn't say that some people don't take too many, but the chances are the majority of the time what happens then is you're just asking your kidneys to work really hard and pee it all out.
Because I'm sure on the tubes there's not to take more than 1 a day, isn't there? I think that's, am I making that up? Oh, sure, I read that or not.
You're making that up.
There are some dosage recommendations on our packaging dependent on the country in which they're sold in, and a lot of that is related to food labelling regulations.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, a lot of athletes will probably exceed the dosage recommendations on the packet on certain days when they're training hard. But that wouldn't necessarily be the sort of, that's to do with legal food packaging regulation rather than what actually makes sense for athletes in real world examples.
Definitely. That's interesting. It's been good. You got any more?
No, you stole my one.
What?
The question about overdosing,
Come on. No, it's good. It is good. Awesome. Well, we are lucky enough to have a partner discount with Precision Hydration. There, I said it. So if you haven't already been to the website, then go to the website and check it out. We don't partner with people that we don't use ourselves. I've been using it for a long time, and we've got stacks of them in the cabinet. So
literally got a box full.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good. And the sweat test, and if you can send over them papers, we can obviously put them into the blog.
Yeah, I'll do that. The other thing to say as well is that if anyone's got any individual questions, we're always very happy to field those on email, and our email address is just hello@precisionhydration.com. Cool. And myself, and we've got a good team of people, a lot of whom are triathletes or athletes and sports scientists. we'll get stuck into answering those and getting back to you, pretty quickly. And we've also got a feature going on at the moment where you can book a free video call with us. So if anyone's got questions about their hydration and nutrition, especially if they've done the online sweat test or got some products and then they want to chat about them and say, talk about their experiences or ask for help and advice, they can email us and book a Zoom call, and then we'll get that sorted out and have a chat with them.
Cool.
That's good. Well, anyone that's ever interacted with you guys has always had positive things to say. It's not just saying that because we're talking to you right now, but normally, it's a, like I say, it's quite a niche thing. A lot of companies do electrolyte stuff, but we've just not found anything that's kind of settled with us as well. And it just tastes nice.
Tastes nice, yeah.
1,000 definitely. 1,500. I have to have worked really hard and be really thirsty to be able to get it done. If I'm not quite there, I find it really tough to get done.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there, Rob, because I find it the same. Like the 1,500. If I know I'm thirsty and dehydrated when I crack one of those, and it tastes fantastic. Like your body's way of telling you it needs it. But if you're already topped up, it's probably kind of a signal that a bit too much. Yeah.
Sometimes you've done one on the way to races, and I've taken a sip and been like, oh no, I'll just wait for my 1,000 on the bike. That'll be fine.
Yeah.
But no, that's good. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, Andy.
Really
no, thanks for the invite. Nice to chat with you guys.
We'll put the links down below, and if we get some kind of focused hydration questions, we'll follow it up and do maybe some other stuff later on if you're right with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, follow it up.
Put you on the spot a little bit there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very, very much for your time, Andy.
No problem. Have a great evening.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy your watt bike.
Yeah, not tonight. I can tell you that.
When are you going back to Kona?
Well, if we ever get an expo booth there, I'll be leading the charge. Whether I don't know that I'll ever make the start line again.
No. Maybe you never know. You never know.
Say never.
That watt bike is a good bit of kit, We'll get you in the way. It's good.
Cool.
Nice one, Andy. Anyway, take care, man.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Cheers.